Examining the conditions surrounding this disaster, two factors are easy to spot. First being the illegal possession of hazardous chemical waste, and the second, the company's drive to operate without respect to the employee safety, prioritizing their financials. The company had been issued 6 previous penalties for safety infractions. They had also experienced fires and deaths before the 2019 explosion. The company bought their way out of the consequences by bribing their local journalists and authorities, and were able to continue operating unsafely without bad press until the final explosion in 2019. We will propose the human factors theory as the accident causation model for this disaster. This theory has 3 categories: overload, inappropriate response, and inappropriate activities. Examining overload, an inspection prior to the explosion found there was a shortage of operating procedures and technical specifications, checking off the situational factors, unclear instructions for the overload category. Next, the inappropriate response. The 2 driving factors in this category are detecting a hazard but not correcting, and ignoring safety. These 2 go hand in hand. As the company had been fined prior to the explosion, we can safely say they had knowledge of the safety hazards. We can also say that they ignored the safety of the employees when they paid off officials for the infractions instead of correcting the problems. Finally, inappropriate activities, which was misjudging the risk. For this examination, we will assume that there was no intention to produce a catastrophic explosion, meaning that the company was willing to operate in the unsafe conditions, likely assuming that any further incidents would be small and contained like previous accidents. This question is tough to answer, with so much uncertainty still surrounding the explosion. From the available information, we can pull from Chapter 19, Fire Hazards and Life Safety, which does cover explosive hazards. The current theory is that the fire, caused by a trucking accident, was able to travel to the leaking benzene tank, which is alleged to be the main source of the explosion. From this information, we can conclude that the company failed to safely store this explosive material, allowing this incident to occur.
Regarding whether regulations and standards of practice were followed or if they were insufficient is a rather difficult question, since we're analyzing a chemical explosion that happened at a plant in communist China. Communists don't like to admit they're wrong, especially China, so they didn't actually say anything about, oh, we made this mistake. They'll never do that. However, there are things that are clearly mistakes by the government that would have led up to this accident. For example, unbelievably, no organization existed at this time in China to keep chemical plants up to standard and to help prevent future accidents and issues from happening. That means that even though some regulations and standards may have existed in a sufficient manner, since they were not being followed, they were essentially useless. There was no repercussions for not following them. You see, the only deterrent for factory owners or supervisors was the local police stopping by to do an inspection, which actually happened often due to the high accident rate at this plant and many others like it. However, when inspections occurred, workers were ordered to hide from the authorities, or the authorities were bribed to stay away. This all resulted in the continuation of unsafe working environments that led to the accident at hand. Following this disaster, multiple changes were planned to help improve health, safety, and the chance of accident avoidance in the future, similar to this one. These major changes began with a month-long national inspection campaign into fire safety, hazardous chemicals, mines, and transportation all across China. Now, though it wasn't clear what they did during these inspections, I would only hope that the inspections made sure hazardous chemical storage was a top priority, since this was the main cause of the chemical explosion in the first place. Another big change that they implemented was more strict environmental impact assessment approvals for chemical plants. This means that if you are operating a chemical plant or would like to construct and begin operating a new chemical plant, you have to adhere to more strict environmental rules, something that I think is very important for this government to do. New guidelines impacting administrative penalties was the last major change. Now, this was just to act as a deterrent to try to make people essentially follow these rules. However, I personally feel that no matter what recommendations related to health, safety, and the environment are made, until the corruption with the local authorities or until these workers stand up for their rights to a safe work environment, nothing will fix the problem. So I personally would propose that the government give economic incentives to both chemical plants and authorities and the people who work in the plants if they follow sufficient health, safety, and environmental standards. Like I said, though, corruption has to be the first thing cracked down on, though, because if the inspector doesn't tell the truth, all of my recommendations and all of China's recommendations are useless. The relevant stakeholders involved in this accident are the following: the chemical plant company owners, the chemical plant company supervisors, and the local authorities. Now, from the perspective of the chemical plant company owners and the supervisors, money was their top priority. This meant that the safety of the chemical plant workers was not well addressed, as well as their personal well-being wasn't addressed. They were often overworked and exhausted, which we've learned from this course leads to accidents. Unsafe working conditions and overworked employees are the best recipe for disaster and workplace injury. When I was talking about the local authorities as stakeholder, what I'm talking about are the ones who are accepting bribes and are performing false inspections on these plants, or this plant, for example, that should have failed. Now, similar to the owners and supervisors, guess what their main motivation is? It's money. Money clouds their judgment and influences them to do their job wrong. In doing so, they're endangering everyone inside and who lives around the chemical plant that should have failed its inspection. If the stakeholders put the well-being of people around them above their desire for money, then this accident was completely avoidable. It was a combination of all of these stakeholders' negligence that led to the explosion that devastated China on March 21st, 2019. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and that will be all.